Going upstairs, Ashley hissed. Before I could respond, my sister grabbed my wrist and shoved me hard. So hard my back hit the cold concrete wall of the basement. Ashley, what are you doing? I'm your sister, I gasped, stunned, my voice echoing down the stairwell. The door slammed, the lock clicked, and just like that, I was trapped. Before we begin, drop a comment and tell us where are you from and from which city you're watching our videos. And after watching the whole video, don't forget to tell us what would you do in this situation. Be honest. Tell me in the comments below. We read every comment. Let's begin. I stood frozen, barefoot on the dusty cement floor, my hands trembling. The pale dress I'd ironed the night before was now smudged from the wall. From the tiny window above, I could hear laughter, the click of heels, the rustling of satin dresses. Ashley's wedding was happening just 20 feet above me. I was never meant to be part of it. "You're not pretty enough to be seen today," she'd said earlier while curling her hair in the bridal suite. "I don't want you standing next to me in pictures. You'll ruin them." I thought she was just being cruel in her usual passive-aggressive way. I didn't think she'd actually lock me away. The basement reeked of mildew and forgotten furniture. I tried to call someone. My phone wasn't in my purse. It must have fallen out in the chaos. Tears stung my eyes, not from the insult. I'd gotten used to Ashley's venom over the years, but from the sharp humiliation of being discarded. I was 27. I paid my own rent. I worked 2 jobs to survive. And yet, here I was, treated like trash in my own family. The worst part? I had no one here. My husband, Mason, was supposed to come later. He had a last-minute client emergency and said he'd try to make it before the cake cutting. I had texted him earlier. "Don't worry, it's just a wedding. See you later." God, if only I had told him what Ashley said. The lights flickered. I sat down on an overturned laundry basket and pulled my knees in tight. Then, I heard a voice. "No, where's my wife?" It echoed through the house. It was Mason. I jolted to my feet. I said, "Where is she?" He shouted. My heart pounded. I ran to the door and banged hard. "Mason!" Footsteps thundered overhead. Fast, furious. Then, boom! The door burst open. And there he was. Mason, eyes blazing, jaw clenched, breathing hard, like he'd just run through fire to get to me. Behind him, I saw my mother's horrified face and the groomsmen staring. He didn't say a word. He just walked over, took one look at me, and lifted me into his arms. My dusty dress, my bare feet, my messy hair. He didn't care. "You locked her in a basement for a photo?" He growled, turning to Ashley, who had just come down in her lace-covered gown. Ashley opened her mouth to speak, but the photographer, silent until now, raised his camera. Click! The flash lit up the moment Mason carried me up the stairs. The entire room froze, except the lens, which turned away from the bride and toward me. I sat in the passenger seat of Mason's car, still barefoot, still shaking. We had driven in silence for 10 minutes before he finally spoke. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked quietly, eyes fixed on the road. I didn't know how to answer. Because it felt normal? Because Ashley had always done things like this, and somehow I'd convinced myself I deserved it? "She told me I'd ruin the wedding photos," I said, voice barely above a whisper. Mason's grip on the steering wheel tightened. "And your mother let her do that?" I looked out the window. My mom just said, "Try not to make this about you." That was her go-to phrase. She used it when I cried as a kid, when Ashley shoved me in high school, when I worked 2 jobs to pay for college and couldn't afford to fly home for holidays. Mason pulled into a gas station and parked. "I need to know," he said, turning toward me. "Is this how they always treat you?" I felt exposed, raw, like I'd been caught hiding bruises I didn't even realize I had. I nodded. Mason sat back in his seat and exhaled slowly. "Not anymore. Not anymore." We drove home to our small townhouse in Silverwood. Mason ran me a bath, ordered dinner, and didn't ask any more questions that night. He just sat beside me and held my hand like he was afraid I'd slip away. But something had changed, not just in Mason, in me. The next morning, I woke up to my phone vibrating. It was buzzing with notifications, messages, missed calls. I frowned. My cousin Leah. "Girl, you're trending on TikTok." My heart dropped. I clicked the link she sent. There it was. The clip. Me in Mason's arms. Ashley's face frozen in shock. The moment the photographer's camera turned. Someone had recorded it from their phone. It had a caption, "When the bride locks her sister in a basement and her husband shows up like a movie hero." Over 4 million views. I blinked in disbelief. A second clip showed Ashley screeching at the photographer, "Delete that picture," and him replying calmly, "No." That was the only real moment of the day. Thousands of comments, strangers defending me, calling out Ashley, praising Mason. Then, another message came in, from someone I never expected, my biological father, the one who left when I was 8, the one no one ever talked about. He wrote, "Saw the video. I have something you need to know. Can we talk?" I stared at the screen, something twisted in my stomach, because deep down, I already knew. Everything in my life, every cruel word, every cold shoulder, every locked door was about more than just jealousy. It was about who I was. And they had spent my whole life making sure I never found out. Mason was still asleep when I stepped onto the porch with a blanket wrapped around me and my phone clutched in my hand. I stared at the message from my biological father, David Kessler. That name hadn't been spoken in our household in nearly 2 decades. My mother used to refer to him only as the mistake I erased. I tapped out a shaky reply. "What do you want to tell me?" The response came instantly. "Meet me, 4 p.m., Cafe Linden, alone." I didn't tell Mason, not yet. Some answers. You just have to face alone. Cafe Linden was quiet when I arrived. I recognized him immediately, even through the years. His face was aged, lined with regret. He stood as I approached, his eyes searching mine. "Alina," he said, "you look just like her." "Who?" I asked, heart racing. He motioned to the chair. I sat, arms crossed, every cell in my body defensive. "Your real mother," he said quietly, "not the woman who raised you." My heart stopped. "What are you talking about?" I asked, stunned. "My mom is your aunt," he interrupted gently. "Your mother, my wife, died giving birth to you. Her sister, Ashley's mom, took you in when I broke down. I wasn't in my right mind. And she made me believe it was best, that you'd grow up safe. But they didn't keep you safe, Alina." My blood ran cold. He pulled something from his coat pocket and slid it across the table, a photograph of a younger woman, soft eyes, auburn curls, holding a baby, me. "I never wanted to disappear," he said, voice cracking, "but they made sure I stayed away." Everything started clicking. Why I was always treated like an outsider, why my mother was cold and my sister cruel, because I was never meant to be in that house. I wasn't their daughter. I was their secret. I returned home in a daze. Mason was waiting, pacing in the hallway. "Where were you?" he asked. "You disappeared on me." I walked right up to him, dropped the photo into his hand, and said, "That woman, that's my mother." He stared at it, then looked at me. "What do you mean?" So I told him everything, every word, every breath, every lie. And when I finished, he whispered, "They locked you in that basement because you're a threat to their picture-perfect lie." I nodded, tears in my eyes. But not anymore. That night, Mason uploaded a high-res version of the photo the wedding photographer had sent us privately, the one of him carrying me while everyone else stood frozen. He captioned it, "Not every fairy tale starts in a ballroom. Sometimes it begins in a basement." It went viral within hours. But what came next wasn't a fairy tale. Ashley's husband's family saw the video and began asking questions. The wedding photographer gave an interview. My mother called me nonstop, leaving voicemails that grew more and more desperate. Until finally, my lawyer called. "You need to come in. There's something about your inheritance, your biological mother's estate. It's been contested for years." I blinked. "My mother had an estate?" "Not just an estate," he replied. "She had a legacy, and now it's yours." The final photo wasn't the one Ashley posed for in her white gown. It was me, standing in front of a courthouse, holding the keys to a house I never knew I owned, with my husband by my side. And this time, the camera was exactly where it should have been. The drive to the estate felt like entering another world. Tucked behind a gated driveway in the hills of Vermont, the house loomed like something from an old movie. Elegant, timeless, weathered by secrets. The lawyer handed me the keys and said, "She left everything in your name. The land, the house, and the letters." "Letters?" I asked. He nodded. They're in the study. She wrote one every year until she died. They were never mailed. Mason and I stepped through the front doors, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. Everything smelled of old wood and lavender. There were portraits of her, my real mother, on the walls, framed in gold. A piano sat untouched in the corner. In the study, tucked inside a cedar box, I found the first letter. My sweet Alina. If you're reading this, it means you found your way back to me. I prayed you would. I know you'll have questions. I know life wasn't easy for you. I'm sorry I couldn't protect you from what they became. I sank to the floor as Mason kneeled beside me, his arms around my shoulders. Each letter peeled back more truth. My mother had built this home with love. She was an artist, a philanthropist, and quietly one of the largest donors to women's shelters across New England. She had built this life for me, and it had been stolen. Stolen by people who locked me in basements, who told me I wasn't pretty enough, who looked at me and only saw the shame of their choices. I stayed in the house for 3 days. By the 4th, news had broken. A journalist picked up the viral wedding story and followed the trail to the estate. A full exposé was written. How a woman grew up in a family that never told her the truth. The public turned. Ashley was bombarded online. Her new in-laws, embarrassed by the scandal, announced an annulment. As for my mother, my aunt, she finally called again. I let it ring. Then I answered. Alina, she breathed, you have to make this stop. You're destroying everything. No, I said calmly. I'm just finally showing the world what you tried to bury. You're making us look like monsters. I laughed, quiet, bitter. You locked your niece in a basement because she might ruin a picture. You did that without flinching. Silence. I want to make it right, she finally said. We're family. You only say that now because I have the house, the name. The truth, I hung up. Mason walked in with a cup of coffee. You okay? I nodded. I'm done hiding. He smiled and leaned down to kiss my forehead. Then it's time the world sees you. That weekend, we hosted a charity gala at the estate in honor of my mother, for women who had been silenced, discarded, overlooked. I stood in front of that crowd, shaking, nervous, vulnerable, and I told them everything. How I was locked away, how I was told I wasn't good enough, how I found my name in a letter written by the woman who gave me life. The crowd stood and applauded, but one person in the back stood frozen, Ashley. She looked smaller somehow, like the truth had finally caved in on her. And then, for the first time, she walked out, without a camera pointed at her. The spotlight no longer belonged to her. It belonged to me. The night after the gala, I stood barefoot on the marble steps of the estate, gazing out into the moonlit garden that once belonged to a woman I never got to meet, but who somehow knew me better than anyone else ever had. The whispers of applause still echoed in my ears. But what stuck with me most were the women who came up to me after I spoke. I felt invisible too. My sister said the same words to me before my wedding. You made me feel seen. I wasn't the only one who'd been locked in a metaphorical basement. I had just been the one foolish enough to think I had to stay there. 3 days later, I received a manila envelope at the estate's front gate. No name, no return address. Inside it were 2 things. 1, a photo, an old one, from my 12th birthday. I was off to the side of the frame, blowing out candles alone while Ashley and her friends smiled for the camera near the cake. 2, a typed letter. You were always brighter. We just didn't want the world to notice. We thought if we broke you down first, you'd never rise higher than us. Guess we were wrong. Anonymous. The paper trembled in my hand. It wasn't signed, but I didn't need it to be. I knew exactly who sent it. That was the closest thing to an apology I'd ever get. That week, I made the final decision. I hired an investigative attorney and had all estate documents reviewed. Turns out there had been a quiet attempt years ago by Ashley and my mother to contest the will of my real mom. They'd tried to sell off the property illegally, but were blocked. I had grounds, serious ones. But instead of pressing charges, I called a press conference. When the media arrived, I stood on the front steps and spoke from my gut. I won't press charges, but I will protect what was given to me. I will honor the woman who gave me life, and I will not allow the people who silenced me to rewrite this story again. That speech aired across national outlets. I didn't care about the fame. I cared about the impact, and impact it had. Foundations reached out, universities, women's groups, even publishing houses. Suddenly, I was the story, the girl who'd been hidden away. Now standing in the light, 6 months passed. The estate had been restored to its original beauty. I kept my mother's study untouched, except for one new addition. A framed photo on the wall. Mason carrying me out of that basement. Below it, a small gold plaque. Never again unseen. That fall, I walked into a bookstore in downtown Boston. My memoir had just been released. Title, Locked In, Let Out. It sat front and center on a wooden display. As I stared at the cover, a familiar voice whispered from behind me. I finished it in one sitting. I turned. Ashley stood there in a beige coat, dark circles under her eyes, no cameras, no filters. For the first time in years, she looked real. You ruined us, she said softly. I met her eyes, calm, steady, no anger left. No, I replied. You ruined yourselves. I just stopped letting you do it to me. She didn't respond. She turned, walked out the door, and melted into the crowd. And I never saw her again. That night, I returned home. My home. Mason was in the kitchen, laughing at something on his phone. What's so funny? I asked, kicking off my heels. He held up the screen. A wedding photographer had posted a throwback on his page. The caption read, "Still the most powerful moment I've ever captured. A man kicking down a door for the woman they tried to bury." The photo was framed in black and white. My hair a mess, my eyes swollen. But I had never looked more alive. Mason looked at me and smiled. You know, you never needed the camera turned toward you. I tilted my head. Why's that? Because when people finally saw you, they couldn't look away. I walked over